Because of the way the universe is created, we each of us live in two worlds at the same time. And we have to adjust to both. And both adjustments are difficult. We have to adjust to a material life in which everything seems to be very solid and dense, and most things are rather solid and dense. We also have to live in a world where there are tremendous forces operating that we can't even see. We have to live in the outer life of our own bodies and the inner life of our own souls. And this combination results in a series of extraordinary circumstances that have distinguished human existence from the beginning of time. As a citizen of two worlds, man must try to adjust to both. And this adjustment is not easy. This adjustment is conflicting in its various elements. There are many things we can't understand. There are things about the outer life that do not correspond happily with the inner life. And the internal part of man is constantly locked away from his physical daily existence. But at certain periods of life and certain periods of history, these two worlds have more or less come together. And every year, in a large sense of the word, they meet at the winter solstice. They meet at a time when, for a little while, the inner has domination over the outer. For a little while, man's inner life becomes obvious to him. It is revealed in various ways. It is especially obvious to children who discover, for instance, that there is a way of life that they do not experience in the ordinary problems of growth and schooling. On certain sacred occasions, life becomes a release of affections, regards, and understandings that we are too busy to live with most of the time. So at certain seasons and at certain times in history, these breakthroughs have become terribly important. And at this time especially, anything that we can release from within is going to be important to our happiness and security. Now, this world of the inner is invisible in a sense, and yet there are things happening in it all the time that we are aware of. We do not understand the process of thought. We do not know how we think. And we know there is some divine dispensation behind the fact that we do think. The mental process is very obscure, and it is subject to all kinds of infirmities and all kinds of adulterations and excesses. And yet it springs up from within ourselves. Also, when we were 4 or 5 years old, we had a very serious illness and maybe came very close to death. We paid little attention to that after we reached 40 or 50 years of age, and then suddenly, someday, for no particular reason, the incident returns perfectly clear. It has been lurking somewhere in memory, and we were not even aware that we did remember until it was jogged into the foreground again by some circumstance. We discover that we have the power to think, to analyze, to examine, to record. We can compose great music. The body doesn't do it. We can also make great art, but the hands are not the artists. Something inside of us that is bigger than our body or our outer life is constantly influencing conduct. We can do all kinds of things to block this higher something. If we find it interferes with economic security, we are apt to deny it. Under certain circumstances, popular opinion gravitates against it, and we become ashamed of being enlightened beings. All these changes are taking place in something that is very real, and yet we can't see it. Also in sleep we come across a number of interesting circumstances. We enter into a universe that has dimensions, proportions, in which incidents and circumstances occur, in which we are for a time immersed in a kind of phantom civilization or a phantom environment. And we can't but ask ourselves, are these dreams simply imaginings, or do they exist somewhere in the constitution of the individual as factors in his own intrinsic nature? It seems to me that with the study of the esoteric arts and sciences, we are forced to conclude that the invisible universe within us and around us is real, that it is not a phantom, that the various ideas that float through our minds are not just something like a cloud that will be dispersed by the first ray of sunshine. This inner life has a reality of its own. It is a reality that we sometimes retire into while we're still alive, in meditation, in prayer, in spiritual exaltation. It is also a place we hide in when pain and sorrow and misery afflict us. This inner invisible world has rules and laws, dimensions and proportions, just as much as the physical world. And we, in a way, have to live in both of them. We have to always recognize that in an emergency in the outer, we take refuge in the inner. And in a sense, if we have an emergency in the inner, as a neurosis or a fixation of some kind, we seek escape into the outer. If the inner is sick, we can often help it by attacking it through materialistic achievements or accomplishments. We can go to school, we can paint pictures, we can write wonderful books and music, if that helps us to relieve some kind of internal pressure. So where one fails, it turns the job over to the other. And these two work together through the whole long period of life. And some way, many people are convinced that passing over from this world is simply a retirement into this inner life, which suddenly becomes the total habitation. We know also that the imaginations of childhood are sometimes really very consistent and very important. Most children, particularly in the first 4 or 5 years of life, have an extrasensory perception gamut. They see things we do not see. They also have experiences that we cannot explain. Sometime when you are visiting a family that has a newborn baby, is just beginning to open its eyes and see, look at its eyes when it looks at you, and you will almost always notice that it is looking over your head and not at you. Now, this is not because the muscles are so weak. It's because that child is aware of the magnetic field. It doesn't know what it is, and it's going to forget it ever saw it. But under regressions of one kind or another, the child might be caused to remember why it looked over your head and not at you. This is a common circumstance that most people have recorded in connection with small children. The child also lives in a world which has not yet been contaminated by material realities. It is not bound into the kind of tight package that is going to gradually control it as it gets older. It is still living in a world that is beautiful. It is in a world that political circumstances mean nothing to. It is a pristine creature, a creature that is largely still living in this invisible realm, in the sense that realities, while they're not diagnosed, not analyzed, not described, have a strange inner influence, and the child is looking out from within toward the outside. When it gets older, it must sometimes look from the outside inward to find the source of its own life and its own intelligence and its own security. Now, children have many fables, and grown-up people have fables. And I think we all have to realize that there is no nation, no culture, no civilization that has ever existed that has not had its age of fable. There are all kinds of stories and beliefs and traditions. There are all kinds of mysterious and wonderful legends, and they are now regarded largely as dreams of childhood or handed down from primitive times. But actually, most nations have built upon these fables their psychology of life. Nearly all of the great systems of culture that we know have been established upon folklore. And folklore is sometimes an amazingly accurate thing. Folklore is sometimes an unexplainable but real intervention or involvement of consciousness in some type of symbolism. So symbolism becomes very important in the life of the individual. And symbolism is nearly always the inside telling the outside something. With the physical eyes, we see the flower. With the inner eye of the spiritual rationality, we begin to think about the flower. We don't simply see it as something growing. We feel a mood about it. It becomes something that inclines us to a gracious acceptance. This flower makes us happy. It becomes a symbol of some value or virtues, based merely perhaps upon its shape, its color, or its fragrance. But the inner life estimates these things, while the pure and complete materialist just looks at it and says it's a flower. So the outside sees the form, but somewhere inside we sense a meaning. And this meaning is the basis of symbolism, and this symbolism is based upon man's consciousness and the impact of meaning upon the things around him. So man lives in a world of physical circumstances which are comparatively barren until inner meaning lights them, gives them a luminous quality, makes them important, and makes it possible for them to contribute to our well-being as we go along. Now, among all the legends we have about these things, I think we can compare two systems of legendary that seemingly have a peculiar vitality. One is Buddhism and the other is Christianity. These two are tremendous revelations that from the very beginning had a delicate balance between internal experience and external circumstances. In the Buddhist religion, as it is practiced in about 700 or 800 million homes, in Buddhism the idea is that all visible things are suspended from invisible causes. And these invisible causes are so very close to us that at any moment they may break through into our visual consciousness. All of the great hierarchies of Buddhism are internal realities. These various supernatural, superphysical beings are not regarded as merely shadows, nor are they accepted as physical literalisms. They are not dated as historical personages. They live in this mysterious inner life of realities. They are powers, they are forces, they are principles, they are reactions to circumstance, and they are the refuge in time of trouble. For the individual in pain or sorrow seeks the consolation of realities, invisible but all-powerful. Now the same is true in Christianity. The various doctrines and beliefs of Christianity are largely exhibitions or releases of inner realities. They are things that we think of as principles and then clothe them with forms. We give them a dimensional existence, although we realize that it is our own inner eye that sees this in the physical thing. We have an inner perception that looking at an ordinary object no longer sees it as ordinary, but sees it as some kind of a magnificent mystery. In the physical world, things are very profane and prosaic, but in the world of inner realities, everything is wonderful. Everything is miraculous. It is full of supernatural circumstances, because these are always there. But in our material external life, we remove these supernatural experiences and simply accept words, names, titles, and things of this nature in our acceptance of things that happen to us. I think it's very nice to remember maybe a little word from Socrates on this particular point. And Socrates one day was talking to one of his disciples, and he put his hand into the stack of vegetables in a cart, and he pulled out a carrot. And he said to his disciple, "What is this?" Why, he says, "It's a carrot." So Socrates said, "And what is a carrot?" "Why, a carrot's a vegetable." "Yes. And what is a vegetable?" "Well, it's anything that looks like a carrot." Socrates said, "That's fine. Now my ignorance is complete." And this is the problem. In the outer world, we name everything and understand nothing. In the inner life, we do not need any names, because the life in things acts upon our internal faculties. And perhaps this has something to do with Christmas, very definitely, in the dear old image of Santa Claus. Is Santa Claus really a myth? Well, we know that the old St. Nicholas of Myra was a real old bishop. We also know that he became famous all over the world for nearly 1900 years as the leader of generosity. During his own lifetime, it is said that on several occasions he pawned the cups and candlesticks on the altar of his church in order to serve the poor. In any event, he was a nice old gentleman, and he always did his generosities secretly. And he became gradually the symbol of unnamed giving, a giving which was to represent a pure release from the internal, that we gave because we wanted to, and because there was a certain fulfillment that we can't get any other way. We can please the outer life by depositing something in the bank towards our old age security, but we please most the inner life by giving away something, by bestowing happiness or security upon others. Now, it's very possible that the church made a mistake when it decided that St. Nicholas was going to be removed from the calendar of saints. They said they couldn't find him, that there was a question as to whether he ever existed or not. And, that is very, very interesting, the mood of the hour seems to suggest that secret giving has gone out of style. We don't want to be responsible to fulfill the image of a myth. In fact, we don't want to particularly fulfill it if it happens to be a fact. So the lack of the true spirit of giving may have something to do with the elimination of the saint. We don't believe in the quality of St. Nicholas. We are not taking money out of our banks or pockets too often to serve some person without their even knowing what we're doing. So the secret giver, which was the St. Nicholas ideal, is sort of in conflict with modern procedures. But on the other hand, what about it? For 18, 19 centuries, man has believed in a certain kind of secret generosity. Now, this has to have an original, and the original is in himself, inside. Therefore, somewhere lurking in the inner reality of things is a mysterious reality called Santa Claus. He doesn't have a long beard, he doesn't wear a red jacket, but he is a principle in us. He is something that is more real than many of the external things with which we become associated. Therefore, when we have to let little children know that there's a question as to whether there is a Santa Claus or not, what we are really telling them is that we no longer believe in this visualization within ourselves. We do not believe in Santa Claus because Santa Claus is not working inside of us. But somewhere in every human being there is a Santa Claus. It has to be. Because from the beginning human beings have in moments at least served others in need. They have given help to those who are desolated. And they have brought laughter and smiles to little children. And they have become symbols of generosity, which perhaps the child will remember in later time. Now, it's a pity, of course, that this whole procedure has been heavily commercialized. We know that. On the other hand, the instinct to give, the instinct of the secret giver, the instinct of man sensing something which he wants to express and finds difficulty in rationalizing. Now, the secret giver, of course, of all things is divinity itself. It is the deity that is at the source of existence, that is the bestower. Everything that we have comes from the generosity or the spiritual integrity of a power beyond ourselves. Also, however, this power has a certain astronomical cycle associated with it. And that astronomical cycle, of course, includes the solstices and the equinoxes. The sun, being the symbol, outer symbol of the eternal giver, has been built into hundreds of myths and legends, all of which have the same essential meaning, that the sun is the source of the benevolence of life, and is therefore a proper symbol of the invisible sun within the reality of our spiritual existence, which is the true source of our existence. So the sun in its vernal equinox and its summer solstice moves through the year, and at the winter solstice it is born again. And this winter solstice therefore represents, physically, symbolically, the return of the sun to the northern hemisphere. Spiritually, factually, within ourselves, this particular experience, this rising annually of the sun, is twofold. First, it does react upon our inner life in the form of increasing vitality. Physically, the coming of the sun strengthens the body, but the coming of the spiritual sun enlightens the interior of the being. Therefore, our greatest good in terms of the strengthening of the inner reality is the fact that every year this reality is fortified internally and externally by the mystery of enlightenment. Visible enlightenment and spiritual enlightenment. Now, in all the ancient mystery rites and so forth, the body became the symbol of a temple. The body is a temple, it is a sacred place. Humanity is a temple. Creation is a temple. And as one writer said, this universal temple has for its spans and arches the clasped hands of comrades. It is a great living thing, alive invisibly, and also gradually moving into visibility from the inner life of the individual. In the ancient metaphysics of the Kabbalah, it is said that the temple on Mount Moriah, the physical temple of Solomon the king, is on earth directly beneath the eternal and invisible temple of the eternal in the sky above. And the same is true with us. Our visible life is in the visible world, but it is a reflection or a suspension from that which is invisible and is the source of it. And at the time of Christmas, we like to think that perhaps this invisible reality comes and lives with us a little while. We like to believe that there are occasions in which the inner breaks through into the outer. And it does, almost any time. A simple example of the breaking through is our love for beauty and our love for growth and tenderness and kindness to living things. Whenever we have a great affection, something more than the body is involved. This affection is the recognition of love as a reality, not as an emotion. That love exists eternally as a kind of abstract being, and that this same being has a throne inside of our own realities. Therefore, that we love because love is. We are grateful because gratitude is. We are hopeful because hope is. And we serve each other because this is a way of testifying to the natural benevolence that is inside of us. So we are very complicated inside, and very often the inside becomes in conflict with the outside. Sometimes when the inside says be generous, we don't listen, because it is contrary to the will of the outside. Now, the outside is represented in its highest aspect by the mind. The mind being in its own nature the leader of the body. The mind is a kind of ego. It is a shadowy reflection of a power greater than itself. And that which is greater than itself and behind the mind is the soul. Therefore, the soul becomes embodied in the mind. But the mind never really understands it. The mind never really accepts the soul completely, because the soul says give and the mind says take. And this inconsistency follows us all the days of our years. Now, in the Christmas season, there seems to be a tendency of people to react naturally to something a little better than the normal consideration of things. Now, we know the mind has its own Christmas in the physical world. And this mind world is, therefore, the mind saying, I give because I have had something given to me. Or it says the mind, I will gain something, I will gain satisfaction, I will be proud of myself because I have shared or given. Or it is a duty to give, my religion says so. Or it is nice to make the children happy. All these things are being worked out in the mind. And in very many cases, the mind is pretty generous. It does very well. And seems to meet all the needs. But as the poem tells us, the gift without the giver is bare. Absolutely, the ensoulment of the gift is through the inner reality of the individual. It is when the individual inwardly experiences a strange kind of fulfillment in sharing, and there is a great happiness that is not tangible, that is not reflected in the financial value of a gift, but is part of an impulse that has been in us from the beginning of time. Always there are certain things that move us. Beauty moves us, not because physically we understand it, but because something inside of us reacts to it. Great music is a physical thing, but in some way it touches the internal. And the arts form bridges between the material realities and the inner realities. And all through life we are trying to balance these two. When we manage to accomplish a reasonable degree of adjustment on the outside, we can say to ourselves, we are comfortable. We are comfortable, we are secure, and we are in control of the situations that preserve our physical lives. But there is something else. The inner reality isn't satisfied with comfort. The inner reality wants to be happy. And happiness, as the Arabian Nights fable says, must be earned. Happiness is something that is superior to comfort, to convenience. It has nothing to do with extravagance. It has nothing to do with elaborate festivities. Happiness is something inside in which we have performed an action that the inner reality has inspired and which it approves. Therefore, happiness, to be real, has nothing to do with what we have, really. It has to do with what we are. and what we are doing in the sense of fulfilling the highest and most abstract convictions of our nature. In Christianity, we have the example of a great sense of internal fulfillment. Christ becomes the symbol of man's dedicated existence. St. Paul says, the Christ in you, the hope of glory. Well, the Christ in you dwells in this mysterious internal reality. Christ in us is the reality inwardly. And of course the conflict in the church has been expressed through the story of the fall of man, the fall of the consciousness from the inner reality to the outer existence. Everywhere, when the individual turns his inner life into the keeping of his outer life, there is a fall of some kind. There is a misuse. There is a temptation. There is something which is depriving the individual of the final, ultimate fulfillment of himself. Therefore, in the thinking of this type of occasion, as we are in at the moment, the problem is to, of course, put the emphasis upon the fulfillment of the inner life, letting the spirit within us lead the way into conduct and condition. Now, it's also true that in many European countries, many parts of the world, Christmas is not actually a ceremony of exchanging gifts. Gifts are exchanged on another day, a few days before Christmas, and Christmas itself becomes a completely religious festival. This probably is very close to the reality, and the way it is worked out is that if the gifts have been given earlier as physical realities, and we have beheld the happiness and comfort and pleasure and perhaps security we have helped to contribute, then we are no longer involved in giving and taking on the actual day of Christmas itself. We are involved only in the spiritual mystery of, we might say, spiritual generosity. We are only in the presence of that which says to give is a great reality. To take is a physical reality. To create this inner life, we have to give expression to what is called sometimes the higher self. Now, this higher self is a little difficult to cultivate because we don't have any boundaries to work with. The inner self is something that is always telling us to do it right, whereas the outer self is trying to get us to advance our own causes regardless of circumstances. But the actual mystery of the do-it-right factor is represented as a religious festival, not as an exchanging of gifts. The gifts are exchanged on an earlier day, in the same month, some maybe a week before. But the actual ceremony is the individual testifying to the presence of the eternal giver, the eternal power which has made possible everything that we are. Therefore, each of us, in a sense, if we understand it correctly, become workers in the Santa Claus factory. We are all helping to make the gifts that Santa Claus is going to bring to the little children. We are there helping in the world, helping a war-stricken world, helping a destitute world, helping a terrified world, and preparing what we can in the form of inner strength to that which needs. This, therefore, becomes a kind of spiritual communion. It is the great moment of man's recognition that he is a servant of a principle greater than himself. We are all servants in the house of the eternal. This coming upon us at Christmas is a very valuable experience. There is no other festival that we have that has quite the participation. Easter is more a complete statement of the victory of the internal over the external. but Christmas is the birth or recognition of the existence of an eternal that is to come to birth at the vernal equinox. So we have all the symbols that are involved in Christianity. And most of all, we have this realization that the Sermon on the Mount, or the messages which have been given to us by enlightened leaders over the ages, represent a way of life that we should all definitely be following. In the actual problem itself, it also happens, of course, that parental influence on the young is a kind of Santa Claus experience. We take care of them until they can take care of themselves. We become a foster father or mother to those who come to us in this life. We are therefore forever giving to them, and most parents do not question the giving. In the small child and its needs, the human being depends almost completely upon the incentives of internal reality, love, understanding, sympathy, determination to be a fulfilling parent. These things come from the inside. Later, when the child gets old enough to be difficult, leadership is transferred to the outer reality, and we try to discipline. But in the beginning, the discipline is simply to care, to do that which is necessary to make things better. Now, in the Christmas spirit, we must never forget that we have a right to have a happy Christmas ourselves. There is no reason why Christmas should all be directed in some other direction, nor is it selfish for us to think of ourselves at Christmas if we are thinking on the level of reality. If we are thinking on the level of internal good, if the inside is given the chance to bring its fulfillment of happiness, then we are really releasing God through our own action and conduct. It is only selfish when it is on the objective realities, the physical. Physical realities, we want things. The invisible spiritual realities, we do not want things. We invest everything in the release of the divine through ourselves. It is deity we serve, not ourselves. So this Christmas, with the world in its rather complicated condition, I think we should try to make Christmas a little more meaningful in terms of release of the real through ourselves. One thing perhaps we have to do is revise our own thinking as to Christmas. To revise our feeling, for instance, that comes to the surface almost instantly that it is simply the merchant's holiday. That we don't really want to give these things. We do not really want to spend our money on other people, but it's a moral duty because they've given things to us. This attitude is basically a physical attitude. It has to do with the things we get in the material world and the world in which we live materially and our relationships with other material beings in this world. But behind this is this other, more important thing. The process of realizing that material reality is largely dedicated to taking and spiritual reality to giving. There's a great difference between these two. The giving of self, the giving of that which is reality inside. Now, it doesn't cost a nickel to do this. There is no problem of expense, but it is a far more difficult thing to do. It is not so bad to go down and buy something for a person, but it is much more difficult to bestow upon ourselves a higher dimension of our own integrity. It is hard for us to dedicate our soul life to the service of a spiritual reality. It is time to think very carefully of the type of gift reality in its spiritual sense bestows. In life, it bestows harmony. It helps to create peace. It gives us continuities of responsibility. It makes sincerity. And it makes an unselfish solution to many of the problems of outer living. But this all has to be fortified by internal reality, or it becomes too much of a burden, too difficult, and hardly worthwhile. It has to be founded on an internal realization. Now, in the internal realizations of things, where do our faults most frequently arise? I would say they most arise in judging, condemning, and analyzing, and conflicting, and competing. These are the things which have a tendency to disfigure the outer life and inhibit and frustrate the inner life. So we can take little things and give ourselves the greatest gift of all, and that is the gift of a released, manifesting internal reality. This reality can take up all kinds of problems. And of course, from a physical standpoint, this is regarded as inappropriate at the time. But it may be not fashionable at the moment, but it is fashionable for all eternity. And this is to straighten out, as far as we possibly can, all the ulterior attitudes with which we are not only deforming ourselves, but endangering ourselves. Reality, among other things, is health. Reality is the individual in whose nature there is no conflict. Sickness is very largely the karmic reaction of conflict. There are various causes, but this is one of the most important. Therefore, the proper recognition and practice of the inner realities lengthens life, makes it more pleasant, bestows beauty and affection upon others around us, and makes our own life glow with a certain internal radiance, which is contagious or infectious or whatever you want to call it. Other people take it on. They see these qualities and they respect them, even though they cannot actually practice themselves. So at the Christmas season, let's give the lower reality, the personal reality, the benediction of an internal reality experience. Let us try to turn the destiny of our own composite over to the best part of ourselves, at least for a little while, and get used to the experience. Ultimately, we'll have it all the time. We have to. But at the moment, it'll be fortunate if we can keep it even for a few hours. But it can help. It can build towards the things we want to accomplish. But at the moment, it'll be fortunate if we can keep it even for a few hours. But it can help. It can build towards the things we want to accomplish. So we can begin by giving ourselves an experience of internal peace. Peace in reality is the attitude, the realization of inner reality. Inner reality is always at peace, because there is nothing that can assail it. Outside reality cannot assail it. It can only go in conflict with it, but it can never change it, or diminish it, or destroy it, because the higher reality is the highest thing in existence, so far as we know. And nothing can take it away. But we can, through various attitudes, restrict its manifestation. But it will continue to be there and come through as it can if it takes 1,000 lives to do it. The reality, the divine reality of peace, happiness, truth, understanding, love, service, these things must ultimately rule the world. And until then, the world will never have complete peace. And this fact that it will rule the world is the result of the fact that it will rule the human beings who inhabit the world. It will make possible for society gradually to come into harmony with the higher realities of existence. And so we can start by doing the best we can in various ways. We can give ourselves a kind of Christmas present by allowing the realization of our higher reality to come through. It will help us to eliminate worry. It will take away this constant pressure of unhappy memories. It will help us to adjust to a physical condition that is far from satisfactory. But the fact that the physical condition is difficult is due to the fact that too long we have failed to cure it.
If we have spent most of our lifetime in the material reality factor, and we suddenly try to experience the divine realities, we find conflict, we find confusion, and even perhaps a certain amount of emotional or even physical disturbance. But we have to do it finally. So we can take, for instance, the realization that when we're in a church, most people are quiet. We don't have very many arguments in front of the altar. Things are more or less at peace. And in Europe particularly, or in any of the non-Christian temples, wherever sacredness is dwelling, the atmosphere is really always calm and pleasant. People coming into a church have been chattering as tourists on the steps, but when they get inside, they keep quiet. They enter into a sacredness that is away from the world, a sacredness which is respected. And the respect is that the gentleman takes off his hat and the lady has some little prayer or a beautiful thought in her mind. But in the church or in the cathedral itself, there is a quietness of peace. And the building itself, in the old days when they really built them, was designed by a Vitruvian master, a great artificer, who put into that building all the symbolisms of eternal truth. The building was a physical symbol, a crystallization of worship. And this carries on, and we feel it when we go there. So we can also have the same kind of feeling when we go away from the objective realities and take our stand firmly in the spiritual realities. We can find peace and comfort. On the mental and physical level, we may have an argument. But in the higher aspect of things, this higher reality says that all life is one, that our neighbor is only ourselves in a different body. This is one of the points of Oriental philosophy, that the stranger is ourselves in another body. And this is something we should all try to realize. Now, we'll be disillusioned and disappointed because other people who do not live in that type of reality will not understand us. But if we try to please them, we will be as sick as they are. Therefore, we have to hold our own integrities, even though it may seem that we are not appreciated. But one thing that we can always do is to cultivate quietude and peace and find the habit of happiness, something that we can all develop. Happiness is the ability to rise above the problems of the material realities and take refuge in those principles and causes which we all must face. Also, we have to realize that this problem of reality has a certain kind of termination. We know that the material reality is impermanent. We know that although wars may go on for thousands of years, the individual is limited in his material adjustment to circumstances. He has his 80 years, or maybe 50 now. But in the end, material reality must cease for all of us. Maybe it will go into a subjective state and come out again later. But for a time at least, we cannot maintain the continuity of our material realities. We can have a large and beautiful home, but we can't take it with us. We can have a tremendous reputation, but it gradually fades into silence. Unless that reputation is founded in spiritual reality, then the individual has a strange immortality in the hearts of his fellow creatures. But always, the material realities are impermanent. Therefore, they have to be secondary. They have to be inferior to that which is eternal. The great realities of life never change, and we have to begin to try to understand them. Life never ceases, and the dreams of death and birth relate only to physical realities. The great realities are immortal. The great realities are indestructible. The great realities are forever flowing streams of inspiration descending from the heights above to make fertile the plains below. Always the spiritual reality is our source and our ultimate. It is the presence with us. It is the power that sustains us through every emergency of life. It has a strange compact with the beating of the heart, and it also has a tremendous influence upon health and happiness and security. Mencius, the great Chinese sage, talked of the child heart, and Confucius was of the same mind, namely that in the reality, the great reality of things, the child heart dominates. The body grows up and grows old, but the child heart is part of the reality that is eternal. Most people forget that while the body is aging, the soul is not aging. The soul is always not only young, the soul is always full of joy and of hope. Just as little children have their great moments of sorrow and forget them quickly, so life has its misfortunes, but the reality recovers quickly, and it is only the lower mind that clings desperately to its own mistakes. So the child heart is the heart of hope. The child heart finds the world a garden. The material heart finds it a prison. The child heart loves the beautiful, and the material heart is afraid of beauty or is disinclined to cultivate it. The supreme spiritual heart has no losses, but the material heart suffers loss and gain in the alternations of society. Therefore, actually, what we are trying to do is to call upon that which is best to help us to control the personality and the daily struggle for existence. We have this in religion as the great hope. Religion is the power which is vested in the superior reality and which descends as a gentle mist or rain upon the earth to make it fertile. Today in politics all over the world, we find that materialism is determined, if possible, to destroy the inner reality. The materialism merely wishes to enslave the body and to bend the mind with its various aptitudes to an industrial psychology of wealth. Therefore, every time the mind takes over and sacrifices the spirit for its own advantages, we find trouble. We find it in world affairs. And we find now that materialism as such has so disproven itself, and the mind with its plans and strategies and subtleties has so deceived itself that we are beginning to sense the tremendous importance of restoring the higher reality as the controller and director of conduct. When we do this, we can call ourselves idealists, whereas when we depend upon the lower reality for survival, we can call ourselves materialists. The materialist has very few advantages to compensate for what he has lost. He has lost hope and gained a few years of fame or distinction or built a new factory. But always the things that the materialist creates must pass with him. The idealist is dreaming, hoping, and building in terms of eternity. So as an idealist, we have to make every possible effort to restore man's recognition that there is a power behind life that is controlling it, that there is a reality behind life, which is not only a disciplinarian, but is also a great and bountiful spirit of generosity. So Santa Claus comes to be a kind of a symbol of the return to life of these things which are hopes. The Christmas tree is the symbol of immortality. Martin Luther is said to have been the first to put candles on it for the celebration of Christmas, and the candles were the stars and constellations. The symbol of the evergreen, or the sprig of acacia, is the sign of the restoration of life, that which lives through the winter. The pine remains green even in the heaviest winter seasons. This is the symbol of reality, rising out of and surviving all of the vicissitudes of physical climatic conditions, moral or physical. Therefore, the life in eternity is something each person has to cultivate, and he can do it. And he will find it very, very helpful for him to do it. He must accept the gifts of the upper reality, the supreme state, thankfully, graciously, and with dedication, and devote his life as far as he can to the release of the best of himself and its gradual converting of the lower personality. The great ministry is to convert the flesh to the will of the soul. And when it happens, it's not going to make us a group of very stuffy people either. It is not going to destroy the joy of life any more than childhood has destroyed the life. We are told by Christ that heaven is for little ones. The children shall inherit all things. Well, the childhood is the simple child heart of Mencius. It is that which lives in hope and faith, believes in the good of everything, and by always believing in the good, makes the good finally the reality. So we can start maybe with New Year's resolutions. They're always considered appropriate to the season. A New Year's resolution generally lasts anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, but it's better than nothing. Some people now are too practical to attempt it because they don't want to fail. But sometimes you have to attempt it in order to succeed. Otherwise you never can. So there can be New Year's resolutions. And these resolutions will have to depend to a large degree upon each person's interpretation of the mystery of his own inner self. He will have to try to define what he means and what we all mean by eternal inner reality. If we want to accept this reality for what it really is, we know that it is eternal, that it can never be violated, that it can never under any conditions work evil, that it can destroy nothing that is good. In fact, it can destroy nothing, because nothing can destroy reality. And the only thing that realities can do is to preserve the immortal and eternal parts, truth and principles of existence. So with this thought in mind, we can say to ourselves, as a New Year's resolution, that beyond all of our estimation, there is a universe that is eternally good. There is an infinite going on to beyond the boundaries of known time and space, and it is filled with life. It is part of a tremendous pageantry of eternal revelation. It is like the revelation of John on the Isle of Patmos. It is an eternal pageantry of divine processes. It is a continual proof that at the source of all things is a divine reality, and that this reality can be called God, it can be called truth, love, principle, law, whatever we want to call it. But it is a living reality. It is a living truth, not something written on a page. It is not only a living truth, but it is a living law, which is not something merely administered by a bailiff. It is something that administers itself out of its own eternity. All these things are real. And in the midst of this reality, we are the doubters. We just can't understand why things aren't better. We believe that we have done the very best we could, and that things should break so that we get what we want or we believe that we need. all this struggle to try to change things to our own convenience is a very serious mistake. It is up to us to transform ourselves into the embodiments of the eternal convenience of reality. We have to be that which reality requires. And when the interval between man's personality and the indwelling reality is crossed, then the individual has a new life in truth, which is difficult for us to even describe, but it is very, very important. So this deal, let Santa Claus bring us, perhaps, another gift of insight, a gift of appreciation, a gift of understanding, and a realization that our problems are here because we have not understood them. That they are here because we have not used a correction on a level superior to the problem. Our idea of solving a problem is to be locked in conflict with it, when this can never work. A problem is never solved until the divine reality is established in the matter under consideration. When the reality is established, the problem ceases. It ceases because it is no longer questioned, no longer doubted, and no longer fought against. Now we could say, but how can we accept a reality such as nuclear armament and things of this kind that seem so terrible to us all? They can be accepted, but only on the level of a reality. And that reality tells us, first of all, of course, ultimately, that no creature that is considered or able to consider realities, who is able to have contact with his own inner life, can invent nuclear armament, or having invented it, can never use it. But there is always this physical reality says that there's dollars in our pockets if we get there first. There will end, however, there will be neither dollars nor pockets. There will simply be another great sorrow, not because reality is against us, but because reality is parental, and it has to affirm its own inevitability. And that inevitability is the inevitability of truth over love, truth over disappointment or disfigurement, love over hate. It is the victory of the reality in all things over the deformities of attitudes which we are constantly disfiguring. So it's the Christmas time. We can give ourselves a nice gift. We can give ourselves a little more patience to understand things. Now, patience doesn't seem to be very much of a gift, especially when we feel like being impatient. But it is a gift, because the impatience will only make sorrow for ourselves or others. It will only use up energy with no production. It will take attitudes that are utterly inconsistent with the religions we may follow. And we have nothing but the fulfillment of a grudge. And that fulfillment of a grudge is such a mighty joy that we can hardly wait to do it. Actually, it's nothing. We should be ashamed of wanting to do it. But we also should be ashamed that we cannot transmute that desire for the grudge into something more constructive, more beautiful, and more lasting. So this season of the year, we come to a time when we give allegiance to reality. We give allegiance under many names. Peoples from the dawn of time have worshipped this winter solstice because it was the beginning of the motion of life back to its own immortal expression. It is a proof that things do not die, they only sleep. The love in our own hearts never dies, it only sleeps. It is often marked by such limitations that we place upon it that our love appears to be a hate. But it is not really a hate at all. It cannot be. For the moment it is no longer love, it is no longer valid, and it was no longer acceptable to the divine reality. So we could open the doors a little bit, maybe, at this season of the year, and do one of two things. A mental house cleaning would help. It is very important for us to realize that in the material world we have certain law and order that has to be maintained. Therefore, that we have to find ways of bringing this law and order into harmony with truth. Well, we have never worked very hard on it. Most people are perfectly satisfied to let the law and order fulfill their purposes. Therefore, we have more lawmakers than we have intelligent people, and we also have more laws than anyone can follow. And Solon, I think, is the one who said that laws are like spider webs, which capture small insects but allow the great ones to break through and escape. And this is our problem today. We have many laws, but not too many law-abiding people. We would like to be, but right in the middle of the time when we're beginning to feel a little virtuous, it seems strangely advantageous for us to do something else, to get back again to our own griefs and grievances. So as a kind of contribution to our Christmas thinking, let's take one firm step, that we are in a universe of reality. We are in an infinite pattern, all parts of which are working together for the infinite good of all that exists. But that we are here because we are in the place where we should be, and the lessons we face are the lessons we must face. We cannot go on as perpetual adolescents in the poor sense of the word. We cannot continue to disobey laws and have happiness. We are in a world now of nation after nation fighting, the millions of people terrified, terrorized, and destroyed by the ambitions of the mortal mind, of tyrants and dictators, militarists who want to conquer the world, but who can never conquer anything except the grave in which they're buried. So all of this great struggle goes on with no consideration for reality. The individual can consider reality, and he can realize that the thing that is happening is something that has to happen until man himself wakes up to his own problems. There is no such a thing as a person who can solve all of these problems on a level of government or on a level of sociology. The problem of reality is individual, and the individuality of it is like the spiritual individuality of the human being. Each individual has a life spark in himself. He has a unit of divinity which keeps him alive. And it is this unit of divinity that will never rest until he keeps peace and keeps in harmony with universal reality. The reality he has to live by is part of his own spiritual nature, part of his own existence. It is the same thing that keeps the heart beating. And when man is disobedient or destructive, the heart begins to show. It shows that it is perfectly possible for a human being to have a broken heart. And we have broken hearts when we break faith with realities. We cannot afford to go around in a world of uncertainties in which we are struggling desperately against inevitables. We are really moving around in a world of certainties, and these certainties are divine, and they will ultimately fulfill themselves. And we are able to make small contributions as we can to the purposes which nature itself has determined to be correct. So for many people, a Christmas is a gift of hope, and in many cases it is a sharing of love and faith. It is the individual overcoming for a moment the separation between his inner and outer life, and in so doing, overcoming the separation between himself and other human beings or nature in which he lives. The moment we rise above the mind, we rise above the tyranny of diversity. We get over all the prejudices that have burdened us for years. We have been prejudiced for thousands of years, but there is no evidence that these prejudices have ever produced any constructive results. We keep on having them because we like to find some way of blaming something else for the condition that we have put ourselves into by our own attitudes. Therefore, we have to realize that there is no answer to the problem of life that is real and is permanent and will go beyond the grave into the realities of eternity, except that we must rule all of the outer things. Law, as we know it temporally, must be under the sacred administration of divine love. And in the divine love there is a law, and that law is love. And only love can solve anything. Everything else only puts off the evil day or results in a psychological or physical ailment in ourselves. Love is law, the most important law of all. Ye shall love one another. This is coming down to us from the reality. Different religions name this reality differently, but it is a living thing in us. And to the Christian, the living thing in us is Christ in us, the hope of glory. To the Buddhist, it is the presence of the principle of the eternal Buddha. It is the Allah of Islam. It is the Tao of Taoism. It is the one principle which under all names is one thing. For all religions, all enlightened philosophy, all natural instincts, all qualities with which the individual is endowed at birth or before, all of these are under the sovereignty of love. And until we realize this, we are not going to get our problems solved. And we realize this as soon as we think good of things instead of trying to estimate what things are doing to hurt us. If it's sometimes necessary to absorb a hurt, and we do it every day when we love someone, we recover from slights and bruises and arguments and dissensions up to a certain point. Well, actually, the answer is that the certain point should never be reached, because if we love, we do all things in kindness. Now, love does not mean that we have to cater to the impractical in other things. We do not have to allow other people to destroy our love for them. It doesn't make any difference how we feel about things. My old friend Dr. Bronson always used to say, he says, I love everybody, but I don't like what some of them do. And this may be our problem. Parents like the children, but they don't always agree with what the child decides he's going to do. But where it doesn't, then the parent can either punish it, which is wrong, or can try gradually to convince it through action and through understanding and through insight that it is making a mistake. Gradually, these things change history. And the reason why we have never had a nation yet that endures through all time, except it is one will be based upon love. When this happens, we don't have to worry anymore about toxins, and we don't have to worry anymore about interest rates. We have to consider that this world, if it is united in a commonwealth of love, guided by the divine wisdom at the source of life, all will be well. This divine wisdom we cannot change. Therefore, we might as well accept it and make use of it. Use it for the fulfillment of all that is necessary to keep this world healthy, happy, and well provided for. We cannot love truly and be selfish. We cannot be truly affectionate and endanger others by our own ambitions and our own perversities. So at Christmas, all these things should come home to us in a more or less definite manner. And somewhere Santa Claus in his sleigh is riding by, And we wonder how people came to believe at one time or another that he came down the chimney with a bag of good things, or that we hung up a stocking and he filled it. In the old days, he usually filled it with walnuts and fruit, or some simple things. Now it wants to be a very elaborate thing. But nearly all of these things are symbols. And today we are allowing too many people to believe that the gifts are realities. The gifts are not the realities. The realities are the appreciation that we may have, the gratitude that we may have, or the sincere joy of sharing what we have with others. But it has to be kind of worked out so that always the divine is the leader and we are the follower. If this can be done, we can solve a lot of problems. And in daily living, there's no reason why we can't go to work on ourselves. Each of us has a home, which is a little microcosm, a small social universe. Each one of us has jobs. Each one of us has attitudes which we can refine. We can become more and more conscious of the realities that we serve. Persons of advancing years are sometimes at serious loss on these matters. Therefore, Santa Claus might come down a few chimneys in that area of life and bring to older people who have retired from business and who are no longer concerned, basically, with the great struggle for living, who have some kind of income and freedom. These people must keep love alive. And love for them may be that they, having freedom, bestow time and energy upon those who are in need. To settle back and rusticate on retirement is not good. The individual loses the participation in the universal mystery. So every person who is able to do so, when no longer bound to the responsibilities of a job, should also become a contributor to the world in which he lives, must do something to prove love to the day he dies. He cannot just simply settle back and wait for the eternal reaper, because if he does, he will have a sad and forlorn and empty life. What he must do then, if he is reaching the point where he is going to retire, or is not going to be regularly engaged, to turn his love generously upon those who need, to find things that need doing, to find the advantages of service and sharing, and doing something every day of his life as a gift to that which is eternal. The reality in us must work always to the day we pass on. It can never settle down and do nothing. To do this type of thing is to betray the reality within ourselves. As long as we are embodied, this body must be dedicated to the service of others. Otherwise, we get into trouble and have a bad time of it. So everywhere we turn, reality is a way of life. It is a tremendous, inevitable fact. It is a universally diffused way of existence. Reality belongs to the stars and the galaxies and the Milky Way. Reality governs the anthill, and it also governs the space itself. All these things are realities. And these realities are difficult to understand, but we have to finally reconcile the fact that every reality serves good in some way. And that if we can serve good in our way, we are then serving a greater reality. So a dedication of our own lives to forwarding all of the virtues that we know about, proving conclusively that we can rise above all the grudges and grievances that we have nursed, that we can rise above fear, which is nothing more or less than a physical interpretation of doubt. There is no fear in reality. Reality is certain, and that certainty is good. So little by little we can create a personality or an integrity that will serve us well. not only here, but usher us into a larger reality than we have ever experienced up to now. We can all become part of a great giving, a giving in honor of God and of truth, a giving of which the universe is the great example, and a giving which is perfected in the heart of man and brings him into harmonious relationship with universal integrities. Well, folks, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all.